Welcome to the Church Vibes Podcast with Jordan and Maddie, the podcast where we talk about all things Christian, all things culture, and all things Christian culture. This is a space where we love having tough conversations. It's our hope that whether you're a dedicated follower of Christ, you've never stepped foot in a church or opened a Bible in your life, or you're anywhere in between, you'll be able to learn something new, think about something differently, or be encouraged in some small way. Now, on to the show.
Hey, what's up, you guys? It is Jordan.
Grace and peace, everybody. It's Maddie, and welcome to episode 3 of the Church Vibes Podcast.
Episode 3. And thank you all for hanging in there with us. We're now on 4 episodes. Super excited.
Really exciting stuff. And we've gotten some really encouraging feedback so far, and we already have a core group of people that have really been supporting since day one. So to all of you out there, you know who you are. Thank you so much. It really means the world to both Jordan and I.
Oh, yeah. Well, what do we got this week, Maddie?
Well, we have a couple interesting things, but I want to start off with an interesting study that I read this week. And by interesting, I mean discouraging. According to the 2020 update of the American Worldview Inventory, which is an annual research study created by Dr. George Barna, a large percentage of those who identify as Christian believe that being a good person or moral person in general is enough to get you into heaven. This includes 46% of Pentecostals, 44% of mainline Protestants, 41% of evangelicals, and 70% of Roman Catholics. This means that on average, 1 in 2 self-proclaimed Christians believe good words, good deeds, acts of kindness, or whatever phrase strikes your fancy, have the final say in someone's eternal destination.
Oh, man. I feel like this is not, it's almost every episode now. I'm just like that's the general like feeling I get with these. Man, well, first of all, that some of those numbers don't surprise me so much. I have a background in Roman Catholicism. That's technically what I grew up in, even though I wasn't really in church. And so I'm not super surprised by that, but the especially like the Pentecostals and the mainline Protestants, actually, honestly, all the other numbers are quite surprising. Almost 50% on a couple of those. That makes me, like, my first thought is, how many people truly understand the theology of salvation? What I mean by that is, like, do they understand the weight of what they're saying in that survey? I feel like, you've heard me talk about this before, like the kind of the hustle mentality, that we have as just a culture. But I kind of took it a step farther and just thinking about it this week. And I'm wondering, are we teaching a hustle theology? And what I mean by that is, we put so much focus into the church, like the events we do, and we're so thankful for our volunteers. And this is coming from someone that works in ministry. We praise people for helping and for being there and for showing up early to church and all that. That part of that makes me not surprised that people might think that that's what gets them in. Are we putting too much emphasis on the hustle of ministry to where people are thinking that? Because in every other aspect of life outside of church, for the most part, hustle equals profit, right? Like if you work hard at your job, you get paid better. If you work out hard, you get more muscles. So part of me is just like, is that just what we're doing with salvation now? If that makes sense. Like,
Absolutely.
Are we teaching that hustle theology?
Absolutely. I think for me, the key of this whole thing is that unlike many other Barna-funded studies, this study is based off of self-identification as Christian. There aren't any benchmarks for what a person has to believe in order to be categorized as Christian within this study. It's those people that identify as Christian. And I think many of the people who self-identify as Christian, they may even be actively involved in church. They may take their children to church. Honestly, are likely nothing more than followers of moralistic therapeutic deism, meaning they believe in some kind of God and they think believing in him primarily serves the purpose of helping you be a quote-unquote good person. But the gospel is absent. You know, in Matthew 7, Jesus says, "Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonderful works in your name?' But then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice evil.'" I know so many people who have often looked at that verse and said, how can that be? How is that ever going to happen? How could you be doing all of these great things and not actually be saved? Well, I believe we're seeing that now. We're seeing people that think that they're Christians because they believe in some kind of a God and they try to be a good person. But the gospel is nowhere to be found.
That's really good because all the way back in school, when we look at just these different statistics and we see surveys, my first question is like, how are we defining terms? And I think that's really important here. And that's something I missed on first look is okay, it's those identifying as Christian, but we need to identify what the term Christian means in this context, because that does make a lot of sense, and I actually feel better if that's the case, like in the sense of like, it's just people that aren't necessarily followers of Jesus saying that, because then I have more faith in what the church is actually doing.
Right, absolutely. And I think we also need to define the term good person. I think that these people probably don't actually know what a good person is, because if you understand the gospel, you know that there's no such thing as a good person. As I read this study, the very first person who came to my mind was Ray Comfort. For those of you that don't know, he's an evangelist, speaker, writer, et cetera, et cetera. He actually runs Living Waters Ministries down in Southern California, but he's probably best known for his open air preaching and his street evangelism. And I've read and watched pretty much all of his stuff. I've passed out his tracks before. I love him. I love him. The obsession is abnormal, honestly. I used to come home from school and watch the show he did with Kirk Cameron called Way of the Master pretty much every single day. His method of evangelism is based off the idea that Paul talks about, that the law is our schoolmaster. So Ray asks people, do you think you're a good person? And of course, inevitably, everyone's going to say yes. Most people aren't going to say, no, you know what? I'm a terrible person.
I'm a terrible
I'm horrible. So he asks them if they're a good person. Inevitably, they say yes, and he takes them through the 10 Commandments. He'll say, have you ever told a lie? Have you ever stolen anything, no matter how small? Have you ever taken the Lord's name in vain? Have you ever lusted after anyone? And when they inevitably say yes, he'll say, so by your own admission, you're a lying, thieving, blaspheming adulterer at heart. But of course, he says it in his amazing New Zealand accent that I wouldn't want to mimic, because I would never want it to be perceived that I'm making fun of him. And I just can't sound as good as he does. But he uses that then as an opportunity to tell them that, guess what? You're not a good person. None of us are good people. No matter how many good works you do, you will never be a good person, because you can't meet that standard of the law. And he uses that to say, but we all have hope in the gospel, that underneath the law, you're deserving of death and hell, that your sin puts you in that place, but that Christ is there to take you out of it. And that's the gospel. And that's completely absent when we just say things like, well, as long as you're a good person, you're going to go to heaven. As long as you're nice to everybody, you're going to go to heaven.
Man, that's not the first time I've heard that. Actually, one of my professors, Mark Dolan, must have gotten it from him, because that's the exact same way he puts it. And I mean, that's the truth though, right? Like, we're so, as a society, so like self-focused, and we think that we ourselves are going to be like, we are the authors of our future, right? Like, that's kind of the American dream. If you can dream it, you can do it, and I love the way Ray puts it. I actually didn't know it came from him. This is the first hearing of it. And I also will say, for those listening, if only Ray was a little bit younger, Maddie is single, and I'm seeing in my experience here a little bit of let's call it theological thirst.
Theological thirst. That's gonna have to be a new term we throw around on the podcast when there's somebody that just hits a little bit different with that theology.
Like, listen, Thirsty Thursdays, like, like let's reclaim the word thirst, right? Like you've got some if you got some good theology, it makes you thirsty. See, there we go. It's none of the other stuff.
Oh my goodness gracious. We're moving
Of
on.
course, here I am
We're
making
moving
myself the
on from
comic
this.
relief.
We're moving on from this theological thirst.
But speaking of comic relief, I feel like we're about to go right into some more comedy.
We are about to go right into some more comedy. We really are. So, 4 words. I got 4 words for you, Jordan. Joel Osteen, Inspiration Cube. Joel Osteen Inspiration Cube. Because for the low price of only $39.99, you too can be the proud owner of a Joel Osteen Inspiration Cube. This brand new portable rechargeable audio device contains 365 daily inspirations, 52 sermons, and 31 affirmations that play with just the push of a button. To live your best life now, start each day with just a touch.
One word, sold. Actually, I think this might be what I needed to get out of my spiritual rut.
Ooh.
If I have the little cube, I'm gonna have to check it out. I don't know if it's on Amazon yet, but I do pay for Prime, so I could get it in 2 days, or more like 3 or 4 with COVID. But I'm so down, man. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I'm trying so hard to just have sarcasm. I just can't. This thing is stupid. Okay, like, way to take Jesus completely off of the table. Like, people for a long time have talked about Joel Osteen and his ways and all that stuff. But like, literally right here, I have a cube of myself, a cube of my words that you can purchase. That
I just say it is important to note that he himself did not make this. He licensed off, or I guess his ministry licensed off the rights, quote unquote, to his sermons and messages and stuff, and an outside company created the cube, and he is not actually receiving any of the profits or proceeds from the cube.
That makes me about 0.1% better.
Well, just wanted to point it out. Just wanted to point it out.
No, that's good. That's good. So that reminds me a lot of like the golden calf situation. Like, people wanting to hear from God, they want inspiration. They're waiting for Moses to come back, and then they wait too long, and so they build themselves something to worship. Like, and I know I'm going a little far, but of course, why not, right? But I mean, what's to say? It's like I was joking about it, but like for the people, I already like Osteen, and I'm in this rut, and maybe God will speak to me through this cube, and like, I get that, yes, God can do that, but you got to see that's a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, I could be wrong.
Well, it's funny because I told Mama D about the Joel Osteen Inspiration Cube, and her response was just too good. I have to share it with you all. I told her about the Inspiration Cube. I showed her the picture, and she went over to the shelf, picked up her Bible, and said, "This is my Inspiration Cube." She said, "It's not really a cube, but it's square, and it's all the inspiration I need."
Sorry, I'm actually just trying to figure out how to order it. I just pulled it up on my phone. I'm gonna have to look, but I did find a Joel Osteen set of inspirational wall decals. But that's not quite what I'm looking for.
That's a little 2011, don't you think?
Right? I'm gonna have to wait till after our show here to figure that out. But on a real note, where do we draw the line with leader worship, or which we might say it differently, hero worship? Like, I've seen the same thing with Elevation Church and Stephen Furtick. Now, I will say I love Stephen Furtick a lot, but I've seen their children's ministry has like coloring pages of him for the kids to color.
Ooh, don't like that. Don't like that.
Right. And so, we have some seemingly innocent things like it's cute. We'll color a picture of our senior pastor. Let's have a cube that has our pastor's sermons on it. But I feel like that's pointing towards a bigger problem, where we just look to man, for our source, because it's so hard for us to, at least in my experience, speaking from my own self, sometimes when you're not in a great place to be able to actually see Jesus there and just in like, honestly, let's be real, to pray into the air and to pray to someone that's not physically sitting right there. And I'm not going to get into theology with that because obviously we know Jesus is with us, but so it's so, I feel like it can be easier to have a real person that inspires you and like give all your cares to him and give all your attention to him. And we already saw that, honestly, in my opinion, with Joel Osteen's books, that are honestly devoid of any scriptural basis, at least from what I've read. I haven't read the whole books. I can't last through them, but I've looked it up. Like we've already seen it there, and now we've gone a step further with like this. It actually, honestly, it's so silly. It sounds like it's a joke, but it looks like it's real. Like that's why I was trying to buy it. I'm like, fam, this looks like it's a joke. Like the Babylon Bee posted it or something, but no.
I actually thought
real.
it was Babylon Bee when I first saw it. But so here's my thing with Joel Osteen. Okay, so from a theological perspective, I disagree with him on a lot of things. I think that he is very seeker sensitive, is very prosperity gospel, and anyone will tell you that I'm one of the most anti-seeker sensitive theology people around. But I will say this, and this is going to be controversial, and there's probably going to be people here who are listening that this is going to make them mad. But I
Get your cancel buttons ready.
But I cannot invalidate the experiences of those who I've known or those who I've heard from who have started off their theological journeys with Joel Osteen, and that starting with that has enabled them to move on. I know people who all that they could take was listening to Joel Osteen, and eventually hearing those things created a hunger within them that encouraged them to start reading their Bible by themselves, that encouraged them to actually start going to church, that encouraged them to get into not just a seeker-sensitive church, but a good, solid church. And so while I disagree with a lot of what he teaches, I do believe that God can work through anyone. And I like to use kind of the milk and meat example. They talk about, you know, you can't feed meat to a baby. And since I'm a vegetarian, I don't think you should feed meat to anyone, but that's an aside. We'll go with the biblical example of milk and meat. You can't have somebody that is a spiritual baby and expect them to eat steak. Sometimes they have to start with milk. And granted, a lot of the stuff that Joel Osteen teaches would be a little bit more like skim milk, aka water with a little bit of milk in it. But there's some nutrients in there nonetheless. I think about, you know, the brat diet, you know, bananas, rice, applesauce, toast, that they tell you that's what you should eat after you've been sick or if you've been throwing up and you're trying to reintroduce solid food. You're not going to be sick and then go and eat a 7-course dinner. I feel that sometimes people are so spiritually sick that you try to give them that hard truth and they'll throw up. They can't handle it. Like, is white rice the most nutritional food around? Absolutely not. Personally, I think white rice is disgusting. I could go on a diet. I could go on a diatribe about how much I just hate white rice. I will not eat it because I think it tastes disgusting. But sometimes you got to eat the rice, you got to eat the applesauce, you got to eat the toast, you got to eat the plain bread before you can go eat the things that you really need and that are really going to nourish your body. So in that sense, I will say, Joel, I'd love to meet you one day and go back and forth a bit on some theological stuff, but I would also be willing to shake his hand and say, you know what? I know people who have listened to your tapes and read your books, and that those have served as a catalyst for better and brighter things for them spiritually, that he has nursed them back to spiritual health, proverbially. So just to point that out, because I know that so many of us are so quick to just completely bash on him and be like, oh, Joel Osteen's so bad. Everything he does is so horrible. You know, I'm going to give him a break, and I don't want to invalidate the experiences of those people that may have been helped by him some way.
And that's further proof that God can use anyone. I strongly believe. Well, without going, I feel like we could have a whole episode on that. Maybe we'll cover prosperity gospel at some point.
Oh,
And
100%.
he'll
We'll
be a
talk
part
about
of
it.
it. But so it wasn't much of a game, but it was a handheld device. But speaking of games,
Speaking
because
of games, nice transition there.
I'm trying, man. This is like the fourth recording. I'll get there. That actually, I say that because the little cube reminded me of one of those little handheld games, like the 20
Right.
questions game, where you could like it tries to guess you. I was just thinking about that yesterday, and so that's what's in my head. But you guys aren't in my head, so it made no sense.
You wouldn't want to be in Jordan's head or my head.
No, you want to stay out.
So, yes, so Jordan gave us such a lovely, non-obvious transition.
Oh, yeah, I'm
Speaking of games, I listened
Speaking of games,
I listened to something interesting on NPR this week. And it was actually a piece about the history of the board game Settlers of Catan, which I guess is just called Catan now because they thought Settlers of Catan wasn't a good name. But at the end of the piece, something really interesting was mentioned, which was that since the initial COVID lockdown, the sales of Catan have risen by almost 200%. And so I did a little bit of research, and as it turns out, the sales of board games in general have actually increased by around 300% since March. So I guess people aren't just sleeping and binge watching during quarantine. Some people are actually enjoying good old-fashioned board games. Are you much of a board games guy, Jordan?
It's funny. I will enjoy them. I haven't been one to like. I'm not going to be the first one to whip out the board games, but I have a
Right.
wife that enjoys it, so I love it. I remember, like when we first met, she introduced me to Apples and Apples, and then furthermore,
love
the
that game.
Apples to Apples Bible version, which is
Yes.
pretty cool. And then I moved on from there to the Cards Against Humanity, which is like the highly inappropriate version of Apples to Apples. And I can't actually.
We can't
I
endorse
can't-
that on the Church
I
Vibes
can't.
podcast.
I'm not endorsing it, man. I'm saying stay away. Keep your eyes clean. I'm just trying to be real here. That's my experience in there. But no. I've actually noticed the same thing. And furthermore, I've seen like puzzles have been like sold out, and like models, like
Yeah.
model cars and planes. And actually, also in video games. And speaking of that, that's my wheelhouse, is more video games. I play online like almost daily, and they had a similar surge because like I remember just a couple weeks ago I was trying to find a controller, and it took me over a week just to find a replacement controller in store because they were just sold out everywhere.
Wow.
And like all that being said, because even like video games with online gaming, you're talking to people. I just think it's great to see people engaging with others in this time.
Yeah, really.
Like they're in most of the cases, like we're saying, like Settlers of Catan, like they're playing with each other. Also, I have no idea what that game is about, but I've seen it everywhere, and I feel like it's time for me to come into the know with like how much the sales have risen. I'm now irrelevant.
I've never played Catan either, which is weird because I am pretty into board games. I mean, I'm not one of like those board game people. My oldest sister is one of those board game people. Love you, sis. She's like huge into board games, and I really enjoy board games too. But I guess I didn't get the chance to get as into them because both of my parents, I feel like, are too competitive and get way too into the game, and so we didn't really play a lot in our smaller family unit. But I had a lot of fun playing board games when we would go to my grandparents' house and all of the cousins would get together. I have a lot of cousins, and we would get together and play games. Yahtzee is like my favorite game. I could probably play that every day if I had someone that would be willing to play with me because I think it's the perfect
Yahtzee's fun.
it's the perfect combination of chance and what word am I thinking of? My mind chance and strategy. Because, you roll whatever you roll. You can't control that. But there is a strategy to which things you choose to mark down. So I really enjoy Yahtzee. My favorite game as a kid was Bible trivia because I was a highly religious
course.
child. As we learned last week when I was talking about the Revelation movie, I was highly, highly religious. I definitely thought that if you dropped a Bible on the ground, you were going to hell. No one
Which,
ever.
on that note, I watched part of like one of the movies she was talking to me about or last week, and
Yes,
fam, that stuff is wild.
it is.
It's
I sent it to him, and his exact response was, "Fam, this movie has no chill.
absolutely none.
No chill. No chill at all." Speaking of no chill, I do have one funny story about when our immediate family unit played a game together. We played Disney Scene It, which I don't think I've actually mentioned this on the podcast yet, but I'm very into Disney. So I'm, yeah, very, very into it. And we had Disney Scene It, which is that game where there was a board and then there's also like a disc and there's video components, and basically it's kind of like a Disney trivia game almost. And we were playing, and there was a puzzle that was on the screen, and the answer to the puzzle was that movie Emperor's New Groove, which I'm just going to say it, criminally underrated. That movie rules.
So good.
The answer was Emperor's New Groove, and my second oldest sister knew in her head that it was Emperor's New Groove, but she couldn't think of the name of the movie, and you could see her just getting more and more visibly frustrated because she couldn't think of the name, but she caught on to what the answer to the puzzle was before any of us. And so she just stands up and she goes, "Llama, llama, 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 llama," because she couldn't think of Emperor's New Groove, but she could think of the fact that the movie was about a llama. And so she said that, and then I said, "Oh, Emperor's New Groove," and then I got the point and she didn't. So as I'm sure you're assuming, that went over really well, because when a little sister does something like that, older sisters usually love it. But that's what I mean. I think my family would just get too into the games, so our immediate family didn't play them too much, but I enjoy them. I think if I get married and have kids, we'll probably play a lot of board games, especially like Yahtzee and Apples to Apples and Bible
What about
trivia
Monopoly?
and stuff. I don't think I've ever actually finished a game of Monopoly.
Really?
I've played Monopoly so many times, but it was always one of those things where it was like at a certain point you just say, "Okay, who has the most money?" and whoever does wins. Because I've actually played it a lot. My oldest sister had a Star Wars Monopoly game. She's a huge Star Wars fan, and we used to come home from the pool in the summer, and her and I would play Star Wars Monopoly together. And then my brother and my grandma and I would play like electronic banking Monopoly and traditional Monopoly and all that. But I don't think I've ever finished a game. I think it's an urban myth that you can finish a game of Monopoly.
You know what's funny? I actually heard that we've all been, I don't know if it's true. I heard that we've all been playing it wrong, and it's actually a pretty fast game. Like,
Really?
apparently when you land on something, you either have to buy it, like somebody has to buy it, or you have to pay someone if they already own it. Like, you have to.
In that
And
case, it
I
would
could
go quickly.
Yeah, so I might try it again too, because I have this thing about like I don't want to carve out like 4 hours for a game,
Right.
or like a movie, right? Like I just have a hard time sitting that long, and so I might have to try it that way.
Yeah. You know, another game I really enjoyed playing as a kid was the game of life. You put your little pink or blue person into their little peg van, and you see where life takes them. Are they going to be a movie star? Are they going to be a teacher? Will they live in a mansion, or will they live in a small apartment? Only time will tell. And much like in real life, some of the little pegs get married and some don't. Which brings us to the main topic of the third episode of the Church Vibes podcast. As a married and a single, we want to speak a bit today about how marrieds and singles have both been done dirty by the church. We're going to start off by briefly touching on our own experiences. So, Jordan, our listeners know you're married, but why don't you give them a little more background on your specific situation?
For sure, yeah. Well, in the game of life, I definitely got my second peg pretty quickly. I like I started dating my wife when I was a junior in high school, and then the same year I graduated in 2012, I proposed, and then a year later I got married. So I got married at 19, which is kind of wild for what most 19-year-olds are doing at that time.
True.
And so, yeah, we honestly, like, we even actually broke up for a short time, like, before all that. And honestly, at that time, I was just really prayed up, and we started when we got back together, because we were apart for a number of months, and then we got back together, and we're like, okay, you know what are we doing now? Like, what's the point of this relationship? And on that
Right.
note, I strongly feel like I think it's dumb just to date. Like, there should
Yes,
be some
preach.
type of intentional. And if you're not dating with the intent of eventual marriage, then you obviously don't see something in them. Like, there's some reason why you don't want to marry them, and then so I might just be the one to say you probably shouldn't sleep with them then.
Ooh.
Which is why a lot of us, we're like, oh, we're dating so we can do that. Sorry guys, you can cancel me. But that's the truth. But like I said, going back on some to my story, was not. I don't want to get on my soapbox too much. We got married really early on, and have been great ever since. And through that, we served in ministry the entire time, and
Okay.
and that's where I think we're gonna see some different experiences. Like you say, like you're single and I'm married, and in ministry, I feel like there's a lot of, first of all, emphasis placed on marriage,
Right.
and then it's like, oh my God, you got married, so, oh, like, you are the, like, praise the Lord, you found someone, and that's great, but there's so much emphasis placed on marriage, and then on top of that, I feel like it goes beyond what is fair, and it almost gives people an unfair advantage, if you want to say it that way,
Mm-hmm.
if they are married and young. Um, because I feel like, and I'll touch on this a little bit more as we move on here, but I feel like I was actually, like, given privilege that I shouldn't have had. I was considered more mature than I was spiritually just because I had a wife, and I think
Right.
that's the way that I have been done dirty. I had to learn some lessons the hard way because I was just given responsibility and given opportunity when I probably shouldn't have, and also when I probably wouldn't have gotten had I not been married already. So,
Yeah.
without going too much farther into that, I want you to catch us up, Maddie.
Well, mine is a lot simpler to say. I'm single. Been single since birth. Single forever, gang. Yeah, I've always been single. I'm still single. I'm in my early 20s. And so I'm now living that life of an adult who is single, because it's different when you're a teenager and you're single, because
Yeah.
there's not that pressure. Like, your friends may be like, "Oh, are you going to get a boyfriend?" But you don't have that societal pressure put on you. So, I'm completely single, and I've pretty much been doing ministry type stuff in one capacity or another for my whole life. So now I'm doing that ministry thing as a single adult. And since I'm already in my early 20s, even if I got married next year, I wouldn't, I wouldn't meet that category of being super young and married, as if I were married
Mm.
at 18, 19, 20, etc. Which I actually wanted to ask you, because the getting married early thing is very big in the Christian culture. You see it a lot, people getting married really young. So I do want to ask you, if you knew for 100% fact that you and your wife would still end up together. Okay, so it doesn't have to do with the person, but if you knew that you and your wife would still be together,
Hmm.
would you go back, or if you had an opportunity, would you want to create a life for yourself where you would have gotten married later? Maybe like you would
Mm.
have met her later in your life and then gotten married later? Or do you think that getting married at that young of an age was helpful to you, or you liked it that way?
So that's a great question. You know, first of all, I believe that, like, I see some people that have been engaged for like years, or they're like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we've been engaged for 10 years and we'll get married someday. I think if you truly found somebody that you are meant to marry and God wants you to marry them, I don't see a reason necessarily to wait. It's like, for
Right.
me, honestly, I feel like for lack of a better way to put it, almost like my life began when I got married. That was the largest part of what will be the largest part of my life, starts when I got married. And I do have times where I wonder, well, what would it be like if I went the normal route, or the if
Mm-hmm.
whatever you consider normal, and went to college and all these things. And honestly, I can only see negatives. And what I mean by that is, the this culture is very, well, very like sex oriented, and very like,
True.
go live your life. And we see Tinder, right? Like that's a big thing. But honestly, I see the biggest issue is, had I waited to get married, I feel like I would have just been faced with temptation for an unnecessarily amount of time. Like all the other people around you, if I know I'm going to be married, and but I also, and then I know I'm single now, and I shouldn't be going and sleeping around, like I'm
Right.
just setting myself up for failure, I feel like. um and then on top of that, like, this is the less fun part, but it also helped me be able to pay for school because you become independent when you get married, which I always joke about. I'm like, yeah, I was able to, like, I got married so I could go to school. That is not why. But yeah, I really can truly say I don't see, and this is without my wife behind me and like waiting for me to say the right thing. I swear, guys, she's at work right now. Uh, I can truly say that I don't see any reason why I would have waited.
Yeah.
It makes me a little countercultural in the sense, and even my own family, some of them were wondering why I was so crazy to marry so young, and telling me not to throw my life away, and things like that. I'm like, man, that's just not what it is. Just because culture says one thing doesn't mean that the truth changes, and doesn't change the truth of the Bible and what we're supposed to live by. And so I feel like, when we go back to the verse of saying, like, when Paul says avoid marriage, but if you must, get married. And honestly, I feel like for me, it was that. So yeah, I don't regret it.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's so funny that you bring up being countercultural, because the funny thing of it is that to the world's culture, getting married young is super countercultural. But in the church
Yeah.
culture, getting married young is almost expected slash normal. Like if you're constantly surrounded by only Christian people, it's like, oh, I got married when I was 19. Oh, I was 18. Oh, I was 20. Oh, I was 19 too. Versus you go into the quote unquote real world and people are like, oh, I was 28 when I got married. Oh, I was 30. I was 27. I was 35. So it is interesting because it's dependent upon what culture you're in and where you
Yeah.
live and the type of people that you're around. Because, for me, my two older sisters got married very young. Both of them were married by the time they were my age. One of them had a kid and was married first, and then had a kid by the time she was my age. So, yeah, it's just interesting to think about that it really is dependent upon your environment. And I think that because of that expectation that you should get married young within the church, I feel that singles are often treated as subclass citizens, or treated as if
Mm.
they're less spiritually mature, which is very frustrating. I feel like it's almost infantilizing. Like you'll see people that are maybe 23, 24, they've been married for a couple years, and they're with somebody that's their same age, but they act like, oh, aren't you so sweet? Oh, you're just going to find somebody someday. I just know it. We'll have to get you set up with somebody, as if you're talking to somebody that is like 15,
Yeah.
And I think that within the church, we've really done a disservice to marrieds and singles. You touched on this earlier. When we decide that getting up on stage and participating in a ceremony and even making the covenant before God, that somehow makes you spiritually mature. You don't have to be. Should you be spiritually mature to get married? Yes, but you don't have to be. And if you're getting
Yeah.
married when you're 18, 19, just because you're married doesn't mean that you're more spiritually mature than somebody that is older than you, who has been a Christian for longer than you, who has more ministry experience than you do, But because they're single, it's like, oh, we don't know if you should lead a life group. We don't know if you should lead such and such, or if you should be seen as an authority figure because you're not married. And I think that is a disservice to married people and to single people.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, kind of going back to what I was kind of leading into, so I was married at 19, and if I do the math right, I think I was about 22 to 23. By then, I was actually the leader of a church plant, like literally like lead pastor, and I can't take credit away from the fact that I was married. I think the fact that I had my first ministry degree, I had my associates, and I was a married man, and I could put on a suit, somehow made me spiritually mature enough to lead a church. And let me just tell you, I'm not leading that church anymore. So it didn't work out. I wasn't ready for that. And it wasn't my, for whatever, I can get into all that, but like God didn't want me there. But I feel like I shouldn't have been given that opportunity in the first place.
Right.
I look back at it and I almost cringe. Like, when Facebook brings up the Facebook memories, they're like, oh, this is what you posted 3 years ago. I look back and I'm like, oh geez, it's kind of cringy. But I just, it makes me wonder, like, how does marriage equal maturity? I don't get it. And I certainly, I'll say this. I made the right decision. I knew God wanted me to marry my wife, and I did that. So there's one good thing I did, one smart thing I did. But that was also met with a ton of stupid things I also did at the same age. Like I just because I made the one decision, really that was not some catalyst that just jumped me forward somehow into like this wisdom and maturity. No, I had a whole lot more to learn, and I'm thankful I was able to learn that and kind of grow with my wife. And so, like, again, like I said, I don't regret how I got to this point. But I can't help but kind of think, and I guess kind of wonder, does the church put too much importance into marriage?
Right.
Yeah. Like, because we think about, and I'm gonna throw this back to you, but what about people who are called to be celibate?
Right. We don't make space in the church today for people that are called to be celibate or for people that are called to be single for a larger portion of their adult life than is common within Christianity, which I think is so funny because as Christians, my dad always likes to say that as Christians, we're called to live the life that Jesus would live if he looked like us, lived in our time, had our talents, had our IQ, had our experiences, etc., etc. Jesus was the fullest manifestation of what our lives on earth are to be like. And Jesus wasn't married. And now, of course, you can say, well, of course he wasn't married because he was God, and so he couldn't get married unless you're Mormon, in which case we have some other issues we need to deal with.
Mark that down for another episode.
Yeah, really. So even if we say that, let's go to Paul then. The person who, other than Jesus Christ himself, has had, no contest, the most influence on Christian faith and practice than any other human man ever.
Yeah.
Was not married, and tells people in 1 Corinthians, like you brought up earlier, there is a benefit to not being married, that there are things that you have to worry about and responsibilities that you have that may actually keep you from being able to fully fulfill ministerial duties that you don't have to worry about if you are single. So then it becomes funny that today we've put this marker on it that you have to be married in order to qualify for serious levels of ministry or authority, when Paul is saying, you're kind of better off to have a single person because they can dedicate more of their time, talents, and treasure to the ministry because they don't have to worry about having a spouse or children or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, and I can even think of, I'm not going to name any, but just like 2 denominations right off the bat that probably wouldn't hire me, or actually, no, I should say, that would not hire me or at least give me ordination without being married.
Wow.
And so
That's
I just
crazy.
I imagine Jesus standing there. Let's say Jesus is trying to get ordained, I guess. I don't know how that works out theologically, but they would say no. You're not qualified. and that just seems so wacky to me. I wanted to ask you too. So I talked about some of my, like on my end, how I've been done dirty. Have you experienced anything, Maddie? Like any limitations or any type of judgment on you in ministry because you're single?
Right. No, that's a great question. So, not in terms of, oh, you can't have this position if you're not married, not that sort of a thing, but I've definitely experienced a great deal of judgment and church culture pressure because I'm single, in the
I can
sense
see that.
that people are constantly trying to like set you up. And look, if you're really good friends with somebody and you know them super well and you know somebody else super well and you're really good friends with them and you know that they're both on the same page as far as wanting to get married and all this stuff, and you say, hey, I think there's somebody I might like you to meet, I think you might really hit it off, that's totally different. I'm not saying don't do that. But when there's people that you don't necessarily know that well and you're constantly trying to set them up with somebody, not because you met someone in particular that you want to set them up with, but just because you want to throw anyone at them, kind of like, oh, well, we'll see who'll be willing to take you. It's very offensive, and it's very awkward having to be on the other end of that. So I definitely have experienced that, and just experienced the pressure of like, okay, you're in your early 20s and you're not married. Are you ever going to get married? I've had people ask me
Yeah.
if I was attracted to men
Oh,
because of being in my early 20s and having always been single. People being like, so are you choosing to be celibate because you're lesbian? Or I've had very interesting questions asked of me for the mere fact that I'm in my early 20s and I'm single. And I would say the biggest thing that I've experienced, and I think there are a lot of people in my boat, especially people who are single and are in their 30s and 40s, is that the church makes no space for single adults. It's like, okay, this is for the college age. So once you get out of college, there's nothing for you. It's like, so we have kids in high school and college, and then we have the young marrieds, and then we have, the mom's group and the dad's group, and et cetera, et cetera. But they don't have a space for single adults to be. And I think that this speaks actually to a larger problem, something that personally I have an issue with. Is I really see the power in an integrated church, in a church that isn't split up into so many silos. Like in my mind, have a church service, keep the kids in the service, keep everybody in the service all together, and then go back to that old style where quote unquote Sunday school is before service, and you have people split up into maybe their groups of, oh, I want to learn about this, or, oh, I'm a kid under the age of 10, so I'm going to go to this kids group. But then during the actual service, you have that space where men, women, children, married, single, old, young, they're all together. I think that we need to be purposeful in creating intergenerational spaces and spaces where we're around people who are in different spans of life than we are. Because I think that as single individuals who desire marriage, it is important to be around people who are married to get that wisdom. And
totally.
as married people, there's a lot that you can gain from single people, or there's things that single people have the opportunity to do that you don't because you're married. And so I don't think it's right for us to constantly be split up into these groups, because then inevitably people are going to be excluded. And I don't think we get the fullness of the Christian faith, because to me, what the church is beyond race, it's beyond gender, it's beyond ethnicity, it's beyond age, it's beyond whether you're married or single. It's, we all have the Spirit of the living God. We've all been made a new creation through Jesus Christ, and we're all unified in that.
Yeah, that's really good. You don't see a whole lot of that, at least in the circles I run. The blended, the integrated, not blended, but that too. Yeah, and it's funny. On a side note, like just to show like where Maddie and I differ, I'm just thinking like, oh, a baby in my church production.
Oh my goodness,
I have, like,
that's
lighting
horrible.
cues. I'm just kidding. But like I'm only half, because I feel like I think there is something to be said of like the farther you go away from that, you kind of don't allow that kind of thing to happen. I mean, like with a lot of modern churches, it can be hard to have children and stuff in there at the same time because we've put our focuses on other things. Again, not going down that rabbit hole. I do enjoy my church. We at the very least, whenever we do baptisms, we bring all of the church in, so that we actually take our littlest kids and like put them around the baptistry.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
all that, and like so that they can see the importance. Because like you said, I think there's a lot to learn from people that are not like us, and we should take that principle into all of life. But I would love to see like some of like the seniors volunteering in kids ministry, so that you know what I mean. Like I just
100%.
like I feel like on that note, I only see like moms and like teenage daughters working in the
That's
or
true.
like parents, but that's a whole nother.
Yeah,
That's a
seniors
whole
are
nother
another
thing.
group that are kind of
They're kind
put
of
to the
left
wayside
out.
a lot,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And so that's the thing. If we make a purposeful effort to be inclusive, to be integrated, to create spaces, even if it's not in the actual service, but to create spaces where people from different walks of life, in different times of life, are together, we get such a richer, fuller Christian experience. And you mentioned something earlier. You talked about the church as a whole possibly putting too much of an emphasis on marriage. And so I wanted to talk about just quickly what is the importance of marriage and what is the purpose of marriage? Because if we look at scripture, we see that the purposes of marriage are help and companionship, procreation, protection from sexual sin, and serving as an example of the covenant between Christ and the church. So those are all very noble, very important things. So this is in no way, especially coming from my side as a single person, saying marriage is horrible and we make marriage out to be something that it's not. No, marriage is amazing. It's a covenant that's made before God. It's two people becoming one flesh. It's two people making a covenant with the Lord, two whole individuals working together with God to create a covenant family and to do ministry and life together. So I am 100% an advocate for marriage. I'll be honest and say that marriage is something that is a desire that I have. I'd love to have to be married and have children, and I can just picture myself as that 30-something homeschool mom with all of the kids and making all her own food and herbal medicines and all that. Like that's, I would love that. That's definitely a desire that I have. I'd love to be toting around all my kids to church, being that mom that's like, I can't handle all of these kids in the service at one time. So I don't want it to be taken that I'm bashing marriage at all or that I'm saying it isn't important. I think it's a beautiful thing, but I think that we're all called to different things. And just like with everything good in life, timing is everything. And so I think that sometimes, and we see this a lot, people getting married to someone that is not the right person for them, that they know isn't the right person for them, but they're so scared of the idea of not being married that they're like, well, this person wants to be with me, so I guess we should just get married.
That and feeling the pressure
Yeah.
of like of the other like people in the church saying, "Oh, you should get married. You guys are so cute."
100%. So we need to recognize that marriage is a great thing. Marriage is an important thing. Marriage plays an important role in the Christian faith and in the Christian experience. But not everyone is called to that. There are people that are going to be celibate. There are people that are going to be married. And it's important for us to realize that marriage is not the end all be all. The Westminster Shorter Catechism says that man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And I love that. I just think it's so succinct and so true. And glorifying God and enjoying God forever, marriage can be a part of that. Celibacy can be a part of that. Being a widow can be a part of that. However your life works out. I think that kind of bringing it back to what we talked about last week with we don't know when Jesus is going to come back. It could be tomorrow. It could be 10,000 years from now. As a single adult, you don't want to get caught in the space where you say, well, I can't do XYZ because I'm not married yet. or my life hasn't really started yet because I'm not married, or I'm just kind of in this waiting period before I get married. Because guess what? None of us are promised tomorrow. And that's outside of the fact that Jesus could come back at any moment. Jesus could come back tomorrow. And have you wasted your time because you've just been sitting around waiting to be married? And you're not promised tomorrow in the sense that you have no idea that a meteor isn't going to drop on your house and kill you tomorrow. That you're going to go to sleep and not wake up in the morning. I mean, not to be morbid, but death is inevitable. And, you know, should the Lord tarry, we're all going to die someday. Okay? And you have no idea when that is, because our days have already been numbered since before the beginning of time. And we have to take every single day as a blessing and steward every single day and every single moment that the Lord gives to us. And there's a lot that goes into that, and a lot that goes into what does it look like to steward the days that we've been given. But part of that is not constantly getting so caught up in the future that you're not doing what the Lord wants you to do now. And I'm speaking to myself here. I mean, I guess it's a little bit off subject, but I'll go with it because I'm a co-host of this podcast, so I can do what I want. I feel that for my entire life, I've really struggled with being contented, in the sense that, yes, there were moments where I was joyful or happy or what have you, but I never felt contented. Not because I felt, oh, I don't have enough of whatever, you know, not enough love, not enough stuff. It was never that. It was always, I was never content with where I was because I was constantly looking towards the next thing. I mean, from the time I was 3, I was like, well, I'm basically in high school. Like, just, I mean, you can ask my mom about that. Ask Mama D. I was fully convinced that when I was 3, I was essentially in the same category as my high school aged sisters. I thought we were basically the same age. I was always looking for the next thing. And I kind of next thinged myself out of my childhood. That I'm an adult now, and I feel that I wasted so much of my childhood, of that time of just being a kid, wanting to be an adult. And I don't want to next thing myself out of my single years, where I'm so worried about the possibility of being married in the future that I'm not glorifying God and enjoying Him to the best of my ability as a single person.
That's good. And, you know, I'm going to try to say quickly, another thing I wanted to touch on too is the fact that I think it's unfortunate, and we should try to work against the idea of when you get married, you now become like, you're no longer you. You're like you and your wife, or you and your husband. You know, I see so many times, like when I got married, and when I'm working, it's like, oh, there's Jordan or Pastor Jordan, whatever point in my life I'm working, and there's his wife, you know. And so there came
Right.
with this, like, she lost her identity, but then also she was expected to just be involved in everything I was involved in. And I think that's like a super toxic culture that we have going on in church right now, where like like, guys, your wives have their own lives. Like, that kind of rhymes. But it's true. And, you know, I'm actually really inspired by my own church. I look in all, like, the pastors' wives have other things they do. They don't just follow their husbands around trying to see how they can help. You know, they're not, like, our wives are not our assistants, you know? And so I just, a future for me, I hope for, is a little bit more of a separation there. Again, not bagging on marriage, because I am married, but I think there's some points of improvement we can make.
Well, and how do you feel? Because obviously, if we look at scripture, you know, there's no scriptural case for the idea of soulmates, in the sense that, you know, that idea of soulmates either comes from one of two places. It either comes from the place of believing that we have past lives, and a soulmate is the person that we keep running into in all of our various lives, which obviously we know that's not biblical. And the other place that the idea of soulmates comes from is the idea that everyone has half of a soul, and you have to find the person that has your other half. That's where we get the phrases, my other half, my better half, et cetera, et cetera. Like I touched on earlier, we're all whole beings. We're two people. A marriage is two people becoming one flesh. So then we know that marriage is an act of unity. It's something that brings two people together as one, and it does create something new. How does that reconcile with kind of what you're saying about wanting more of the separation between the two individuals who are married?
Yeah, well, I have to say quite bluntly, I don't believe in soulmates. I
Right.
have a wife, not a soulmate, and so, and obviously the sentiment is there, and I think that's a beautiful way to put love, right? Like I'm not whole. I wasn't whole until I met my spouse. I think that's awesome. Like there's like we see the fact that woman came from man's rib. There is a like the woman completes man, but that doesn't mean that we're like we have half of a soul. you
Right.
know and I what I believe is, and while I love my wife very very much, I believe that if things went differently in life, let's say we didn't meet, like you said, if I didn't get married right at 19, I believe that if I found another woman and we decided both to honor God and to follow him and let him lead our lives and our relationship, that I could have just as successful of a relationship with her in marriage than I do with my wife now.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
actually
not to
agree. Yeah.
that's not to put my wife down in any way, obviously. But to say that we only have to say we have a soulmate would say that there's only one other person for us, and so then I believe that we're limiting God, because what about like widowers who find a new husband and a new wife and live a happy life? Like like I feel like God will honor any God honoring relationship, and can bring unity in so many different ways. And so I think it's a little narrow minded to give the idea of a soulmate anything beyond like a Valentine's card of depth. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's a great way to put things, but yeah. And so I think connecting that back, like my wife is my other half as a tongue in cheek thing. And she, like, if I were to say it, like, I'd say it kind of like in a cutesy way. She certainly does a lot to help me and is my partner, but she is not something that took half of me and fixed me and like made, like
Mm-hmm.
we are in this together, we are equal. And at the same time, we both have souls, and I think we both need to have identities in the church separate of ourselves.
Right.
You
Okay.
know.
No, that makes sense. I definitely get what you're saying there. I think just as a whole, we have such a warped sense of marriage and singleness. We see singleness
Yeah.
as a punishment from God, and we see marriage as this gift that's only given to special people. And that when you get married, you somehow get some supernatural powers or abilities that you didn't have before. And I don't think that's good for married people or single people. I think we all have to realize that we all have the same goal and we all have the same purpose, in the sense that we're all called to be ministers of reconciliation. We're all called to further the kingdom of God. We're all called to live as Christ. And whether that happens within the context of marriage or within the context of singleness, and if you really want to be blunt about it, it really doesn't matter. Not to say that marriage doesn't matter, not to say that singleness doesn't matter, but to say that in the end, if you have followed God with your whole heart, if you have furthered the kingdom of God with everything that you are and everything that you do, you're not going to get to the end of your life and say, wow, I really should not have stayed single, or I should not have gotten married, because you're not even going to be thinking about that at that point.
Mm-hmm.
We need to stop seeing marriage or singleness as the goal and just seeing it as a means.
That's good. So, I think you kind of stole the words out of my mouth, really. I really don't think marriage should be the end goal in life. And when we get married, we certainly didn't arrive anywhere, and we have not finished. Marriage simply means that you have a player two. When we talk about games, player two has entered the game, and now you guys can work together in the mission of life and in your journey. And I think for singles, just strive to be the best you can be. And a quick story with that, I actually tell people, especially like when I'm in youth group and stuff, that I didn't, and I truly mean this, I did not find my wife until I stopped looking for one. And I was in a relationship that I considered serious before I started dating her. And then when I broke up with the previous person, I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm just going to try to focus on just being a better person. I need to really just hone in and stop just looking for someone to date. And I'll tell you, that didn't go too long because God had other plans. I started dating my wife. I can't even think, maybe a month or two after at the most. So it wasn't a long time, but I made that decision that wasn't going to be a focus of mine. I wasn't going to just walk around my high school just looking for the next girl to date. I was going to try to do good for myself. And so I think if you're single, just strive to be the best that you can be. Strive to have a strong, tight relationship with God first, because if you do, if someone does come your way that you marry, it's going to be all that better, or all that much better. And if you are married, if you're on my camp, work to strengthen one another, strengthen your wife, strengthen your husband, and never lose sight of the fact that you guys are playing a game together. If you could play Settlers of Catan with a 2-person team, I have literally no idea how that darn game goes, but you have someone else and it makes it easier, and life is so great with that. And so don't take that relationship for granted. But in all things, keep your focus on God and God alone, and do not lose sight of that. That is the most important thing.
Yeah. And my advice to singles and to singles and to marrieds would be to steward everything that the Lord has given to you, and to recognize that what you have right now is all that you need. Specifically to my single brothers and sisters out there, don't wait to live your life. Don't push things off. Don't treat this time as a single adult as a bus stop or a train station. Treat this time as an opportunity to serve the Lord in ways that wouldn't be possible if you were married right now. And to everybody out there, especially to those of you that are in ministry, I just want to encourage you to work hard to be inclusive, to work hard to create those spaces where people who are single and people who are married, people from all walks of life and times of life can be together and can minister to one another and can help one another and rely on one another. We have so much that we can learn from each other. There are so many ways that we can be there for each other. I want to see all of us getting that rich, full Christian experience that only comes from engaging with a variety of people, that only comes from recognizing that beauty and diversity. So again, single people, don't wait to live your life. Everybody, steward what the Lord's given you, and work hard to step out of your comfort zone and be around people that may not be like you.
And with that, you guys, it is time to say goodbye. Until next week, abide in Christ, love your neighbor, and never stop having the tough conversations. We love you guys.
Peace. Thanks for tuning into the Church Vibes podcast with Jordan and Maddie. If you enjoyed this week's episode, we'd love for you to share it with your friends and leave us a review. For additional content and to stay updated on all the latest and greatest, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Talk Church Vibes. That's at Talk Church Vibes. See you next time.